How many of you are struggling right now? Good. Let's talk about it. Hello, podcast listeners. Thank you for joining me today. This is Ed Franklin with the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. And before I get started, I always ask you to get involved. Send me, on Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever you see me on social media. If you have any ideas for a podcast or a guest that might be good on my podcast, I would love to entertain that. And I got a good podcast today. You may or may not like it, but yeah, I don't really care if you do. So, um, but I want to tell you something that's coming starting next week. I know you've seen me advertise for this. I'm going to do a podcast series, maybe 15 or 20-minute podcasts, and maybe 8 to 10 or whatever it takes. And then hopefully we're going to have some guests on. And it's going to be about raising my 8 kids and 2 grandchildren from my point of view, my perspective. Not that I did it alone, I did it with their moms. It's just how a dad feels towards things versus how a mom feels towards things. And I hope to get some guests, some moms on here, maybe some teachers. Dads are welcome too. So we can kind of discuss, because we know we don't get a learner's manual when we get a child. So we have to come up with things and, talk to people and learn the way we're going. But that's not what today's podcast today is about. I was thinking the other day when I was very young, when we moved to East San Diego, it was 1966, and I was only 4 years old. My parents had had money struggles and job struggles and all those things, just like every other, person in their generation when they were growing up. They didn't have the opportunities that we have now. They had 4 children I was the youngest, and when we moved into that house, I was only 4 years old. It'd make my brother like 11 and a half or 12, and then 2 sisters in between there. And I was thinking about how by today's standards, how terrible it was the way I grew up. Now, not emotionally or anything like that, but it was just some of the things. And I'm going to kind of dive into that, how it was and why it was such a blessing in disguise when I got older. Um, and before I get started on that story, I want to tell you the reason this podcast is called Embrace the Suck is I learned that term or heard that term from David Goggins. And if you haven't read David Goggins' book or followed him um, on Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever, listen to his videos on YouTube. He is very straightforward about just not complaining, no excuses. I think he's the only guy that's ever in history has got through SEAL training twice. I don't know why he went through twice. I can't remember. I did read the book, but I can't remember why he did it. But this is a term, and when I looked it up on the internet, I found that there's a few books written about this topic. And the title is Embrace the Suck. And it's something that the Navy SEALs, I think, came up with. Or I also read that there were some people that were veterans in the Army that used that Embrace the Suck. And I listened to Jocko Willenick at times, and he talks about this too. If you've ever listened to a podcast or read anything about SEALs, they have to go through this thing called BUDS. And it's like this really intense training they do. And he said, once you get through that and you're now officially a SEAL, nobody ever talks about BUDS because it didn't matter. It was probably the easiest part versus going over to Iraq or any other country and having to fight. So I'm thinking about this when I'm a kid. My parents bought this house, and it was one of these houses that sits up on stilts. So you could actually crawl underneath it, and all the piping was under there and everything, the plumbing. And I don't know, it was on stilts. I don't know what the house was setting on, but you could actually crawl under the house if you wanted to. Now, I didn't because there was like things under there, like bugs and stuff. Actually, at one time we had a raccoon under our house. It was someone's pet that got loose, and he hung out under there. And it was kind of a trip. So this house had one bedroom and kind of a family room and a kitchen in between there, and then a living room. And I don't even know what it was. It was not stucco. It was probably just made out of wood, and it was really a shack. I mean, I wouldn't even live in a house like that if I had didn't have a choice. At least it had a roof on it. But it was a horrible house. I mean, the thing was falling apart. The garage leaned over to one side. There was no concrete in the garage. It was all gravel. We had a very steep driveway, and it was all uneven and cracked, and this big tree in the front of the house. And it was just really, I think they paid like $10,000 for it in 1966. And I remember when we moved in because my parents were moving in, and we were sitting on it had a porch because it sat above the ground, and we were sitting there putting peanuts in RC cola, and of course it was overflowing, and our parents were yelling at us, and I think we put some pixie sticks in there too, which made it overflow. So there was really nowhere for us to sleep except in this living room, or excuse me, except in this family room where there were four, because there was four of us, and we'd have to like camp out every night. So my dad, off to the side of the house in the back, poured a slab of concrete, maybe 20 by 10, or could have been a little bit bigger than that. I don't think it was that much bigger than that. Poured a slab, and to get into the bedroom, you had to step down from uh, you had to step down from the family room, and it was because the slab was ground level. Then he put a 3 foot high brick wall around that slab with two openings in it for doors. And the roof was made out of tin. Like, so when it rained, it was super loud. It was just like a tin roof. And the windows um, above the bricks were plastic. Like, you couldn't see through them. It was like opaque, right? And it was plastic. Like, you could cut through it with just a razor blade. It's the same stuff you might use a little heavier duty than you'd use for a something to put down when you painted, but not that much heavier. And then the two doors were screen doors, but they had the same plastic on them. So these really chintzy screen doors, which you don't even see anymore. I mean, at 4 years old, I could have probably ripped it off the hinges. No heat, no air. They put up a barrier between mine and my brother's area and my sister's area, and there was really only enough room for two beds in each area and a dresser, and we shared all that. Now, like I said, my parents, and I'm not criticizing my parents at all. They did what they had to do, and that was the opportunity they had, and they took advantage of it. And listen, we survived that. We moved out of there in 1974, so we lived there for 8 years. And I went to Euclid Elementary School down in San Diego, and God, it was just, I'm telling you, if you couldn't house people in this now, without CPS would have gotten called, you'd probably get arrested. I mean, it was as bad kind of as being homeless at some level, and it was just horrible. And it was freezing in the winter. We had these old Navy blankets, and I know that because they said USN on the corner of the blanket that my dad somehow got from the Navy, somehow got stole, and it was just. But we didn't know any different, so that's how we lived when we were growing up. And I never had a color television set. I never saw a color television set until I was 12 years old. We had black and white TV, three channels, all that. There was this little laundry room built off of the family room and kind of kitchen area that it had a big tub, and my mom would wash clothes in that laundry thing with her hands and then run them through a wringer. If you've ever seen one of these wringers, you'd run them to get the water out of the thing. So, and then she would have to use a clothesline. We didn't have a dryer or anything, and put it in the backyard. And I remember we had this gigantic pepper tree in the backyard, and like the fences were halfway torn down. We never could afford, or they did, if they could afford it, they never built fences. So I think I remember we had a German Shepherd named Princess, and that dog we must have had a fence for her because she didn't go anywhere. But when I look back on that, I appreciate it. And when we finally did move to Poway, my mom got, I guess in her eyes, probably her dream home. It was a 4 bedroom, 2 bath um, house with a pool in Poway, which is the house I ended up with. And I mean, my mom had to be elated. She had a washer and dryer. She had appliances that worked really well. She had all these things. It was a stucco house. It wasn't well insulated, but it was insulated. We had heater. Never had air conditioner as a kid. Most of us didn't. And so for her to go from where we were at down there, and she worked like 1 to 10s at Kmart when we first at some point when we were down there, and then got promoted to another position, and she actually helped open up the Mira Mesa Kmart when it was there. But I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, I'm struggling right now, and I'm glad if you're struggling, I'm glad, and we're going to talk about that. You should really, um, and this is that piece that embrace the suck, right? You should really be happy that you're struggling. The fact, if you weren't struggling right now, if you didn't have some challenges in life and you were just really complacent and you just had X amount of dollars and you didn't have any ambition to go anywhere or do anything with your life, I feel sorry for you. And I'll tell you why. Because complacency will kill you. If I had all this money and I didn't do anything all day because I didn't have to work or have or do a podcast or do speaking outside or anything like that, I'd just die because I have to have something to do. And if I did, for some blessed reason or lucky reason, hit the lottery, I would still do the podcast. I would still do my speaking. I would probably do some other business venture things that I have in my mind because I need to stay busy. So when I was looking back at that, I'm like, I'm struggling right now, like I just said, and I complain about things. I do the why me shit sometimes. And it kind of pisses me off that I even allow myself to do that, but it's just I think it's human nature. Because where my kids did not grow up in a house like I grew up when I was a kid. And it's not that I want my kids to have more. It's I just want my kids to, I do. I mean, I do want them to have more, not spoil level of having more, but at least have a safer home. I mean, this house, I think if they would have kidnapped us when we were kids, they probably would have brought us back. So I wasn't really worried about that. But they could have just broken into our house anytime. Now, we didn't have anything for them to steal. I mean, I'm sure there was something my parents might have had, but we didn't really have, and thank God we even had electricity, and we only had a couple plugs in the house. I remember my brother almost started a fire once with the working on a lamp. He shut. We had fuses when something your power went out or something. Usually blew a fuse, and we would take this fuse, put it back in a fuse box, which you don't have those now. Um, but I was glad that happened because it's somewhere I don't want to go back to. On the other hand, if I had to go back to it, I've already lived through it. I know I can survive, so I don't see that happening, but at least at least I could survive. I mean, when you get down that low, you have to have confidence that you could handle it again if you had to. For whatever reason you had to handle it, you could handle it. But I was glad for that experience because when we moved to Poway and I started meeting these other kids that lived in, either the same type of situation we were in or better because we lived by our high schools in a very wealthy area. You start to have ambition. You say, well, I'd rather have a car like that, or I would like to have a house like that. And it makes you work hard. We, we get ahead when we're struggling if you're smart because you'll take that and you got to embrace those struggles, right? You almost have to wish for them sometimes. I remember talking to someone on a podcast and I was saying, I think sometimes my mentality is I almost have to get myself backed into a corner before I really start tearing my way out. Um, and I've been complacent before, and it's cost me. I think there was times when I could have taken some opportunities that I didn't because I was a little complacent. So, and this is what they talk about, this embrace the suck. You just have to know that it's part of something that's temporary, right? You're going to have to get through what whatever you're going through, and you will get through it. If you didn't have the struggles, you'd never even think about it. So I sometimes create struggles, I think, in my mind because I have this mentality that if I don't have a struggle, I'm not going to get ahead. And it gives me discipline and it gives me all these things that help me continue that ambition. And I'm just like you, I fantasize about looking at the houses or looking at the cars and things like that. And I kind of want those things. And this is where that manifestation comes in a lot of times, where I really manifested some things in my life and had some really nice cars in my life. The house was remodeled twice in Poway. Um, And I'm telling you, the other part of the struggling thing is it's never going to go away. It will not go away. You're going to be struggling at some level. I hope you are struggling at some level the rest of your life because that struggle will keep you motivated. It keeps you getting up every day. Um, Today was my day off from the gym, and I still woke up on time. I was kind of irritated that I didn't go, but I needed a rest day because I go the next 2 or 3 days. So this embrace the suck is something you should really welcome if you're having some struggles, if you're having some hurdles you need to get over. The hardest part about that is that you're watching when you have to watch your kids go through it. You want to kind of jump in there and fix things. I told this story before when we lived in Poway, we lived at the bottom of a hill. We lived on the flat part, but the hill was, two houses up, the hill started climbing up. And I left a lot of meat on that street when I was, riding skateboards and doing all that thing. And I used to watch the kids come down that hill and get the speed wobbles or whatever. Not even my kids. Sometimes it was someone else's kids, and I could not get to them quick enough to catch them before they took, an inch of skin off. And I just got chills thinking about it because I crashed so many times on my skateboard on that hill. And it's that thing where you want to catch your kids before they fall, but sometimes you see it coming and they don't see it, and you've warned them or whatever, and they do something anyway, and then they have to fight through those struggles. Now, my parents had no sympathy. They may have had some inner sympathy, but on the outside, they had no sympathy when we crashed on that hill because we knew it was dangerous and we took the chance. Now, that doesn't count the 100 times I went down and 1,000 times I went down and didn't crash, but I remember the crashes more than the successes for sure. So I think it's important that when we have adversity, we welcome that into our lives or welcome that into things. Now, it's not always great. If you're having you know, if you're having some problems in a relationship, for instance, those I don't welcome those, right? That's not something I've had in the last since I met Kit. We've had very, very few, if any, disagreements that caused any kind of havoc in the house. And I'm fortunate with that. And that's not something um but by the same token, she's going through the same suck I'm going through right now too, right? She's stuck right in the middle of this too and wants to get out of it. And it's just not going as fast as we'd like it to, which is normal when you're struggling for something. And at times, I think we add to the struggle through us thinking about the struggle, if that makes any sense. You can manifest good things, you can manifest bad things too. So you got to keep that, your frame of mind up. So if you're struggling, which I know most of you are, I'm glad you are because it'll get you motivated, it'll get you out of bed. It'll make you figure out things, it'll make you learn things, it'll make you do a lot of stuff. And I'm telling you, especially for people in my age group right now, this job market is not great. I've talked about it before, and I'm not going to dwell on it. But it's also caused me to learn some things, to read more, to watch more video that can help me with AI and all these things that are changing. Because I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to retire. I probably never retire in my entire. I'll just drop dead at work. I mean, if that's I just don't have anything else to do. And I like working. I like the challenge of working. I like the challenge of having to learn things and all that. So, listen, if you're going through, I'm going to repeat it 100 times in this podcast. If you're going through some struggles, good. Welcome those struggles. Figure out a way to get through them because there's one lined up right behind it. I hate to tell you, you can't live in this way that you're waiting for that trauma to happen or you're waiting for that next struggle. But it's going to happen. You've gone through a lot of struggles in your life. You're going to start facing physical struggles, maybe, medical struggles. We know we're going to do that. So you got to try to nip it in the bud, right? You got to try to get to it before it gets to you. I'm looking over at my notes here because um, it says I have a note that says discomfort fuels resilience. I mean, this is one of those things where I just talked about it. If you are uncomfortable right now, if you are having challenges, if you're going through anything, and there are those things that happen to you, it could be things that are happening in and around you, right? Could be your kids going through something I just mentioned that, or your friends, or a relative, or something like that. You may have to step up to take care of some things. So that's we're going to talk a lot about that in my uh, Raising Eight podcast series. Is a lot of times we had to step up and do some things for people that well, I could have ignored. I didn't have to do it, but I knew I wanted to do the best, thing for that person. So, just looking at my notes again, I put through raw stories, actionable insights. We had, my dad passed away when I was 19 years old. Huge struggle for me because I loved my dad. Not the perfect dad, not the perfect husband for sure. But still at 19 years old, I had a lot of questions, man. I was used to, I wanted him to meet my children. Never got to meet one of my children. He barely got to meet my brother's children just because of stuff. But um, anyway, I'm not going to go a long time on this podcast because you got the point. You need to embrace the suck. You need to welcome struggle because it's going to keep you motivated. If you're having some issues right now and you want to talk about those issues, you can always contact me at edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com. You can always reach out to me on my social media. Maybe you have a situation that you'd like me to talk about on the podcast without knowing that it's you that's going through the situation. I know there's a lot of people in this world that are going through things that are worse than what I'm going through right now. I'm just not used to it. I had so many good years. We were advancing so much. And then we kind of got kicked in the teeth a couple times with a couple different situations. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how old I am. It doesn't matter. I'm still physically fine. I just need to kick life back in the teeth. And that's exactly what we're doing. That's why I do this podcast. So again, embrace the suck, welcome the struggles. It's going to help you stay resilient. It's going to help you be resilient. It's going to help you figure things out. Sometimes you got to ask yourself, what if? If you can ask yourself, what if enough times? What if I had more money? What if I was in better shape? What if, whatever, whatever? Your mind will figure out how to get you that what if. But you got to be careful with that because don't ask what if this goes wrong or that goes wrong because your mind can do the same thing. So stay positive. Look for my podcast about raising eight. I think it's going to be interesting. I'm going to go in a little chronological order with different things. And like I said, it's not about me that I was a superior parent. It's about being a different parent, being a dad and looking at things. I know in this century now, we don't give, we're kind of, you know, we don't give that separation to dads and moms. There's a separation there. We're going to talk about it on that podcast. So thank you for listening. Like I said, this was a quick one, but stay strong, welcome struggle, get over it, have a wonderful weekend. We're in the middle of summer right now and it's hot. Before you know it, the holidays are going to be here. The kids are going back to school pretty soon. So that can create struggles too. I know a lot of you don't have kids at home anymore, but some of you do. Watch my podcast about dads. Anyway, have a great weekend and I'll talk to you all soon.